What I am about to describe will sound like a cheap cliche movie script, but this did indeed happen. Even at home, barely anybody believes me without confirmation from the other parties involved. Buckle up, it's a long haul. Autumn 19, in British Columbia, Canada. I am from Germany, but spent half a year in Canada as part of my bachelor degree. I barely got back before COVID hit. I was 22 years old at the time, and the other people involved were about the same age. Another foreign student and I befriended this local Canadian student. We all had the same interests in humor, and the dude became a very good friend of ours. He told us about the local area, and we spent a week in the summer with him and his father at their very remote cabin near some woods. They taught us how to handle guns there and let us shoot a lot. Then fall came, and we had a lot of free time due to being finished up with all of our papers. So our buddy proposed that we spend a few days at his dad's cabin, this time without his father. We went. Absolutely. Because we could load up on booze and weed and have a great time there, just living the life. 3 close dudes in the woods gaming and getting wasted. Sounds great, right? After loading up on all the supplies, the first 3 days were very calm. On the first day, just like the last time I was there, I barely slept and was generally tense. This is because I am naturally a very paranoid guy, and I often go into alert mode in situations, which is often mocked by my friends. In this case, what freaked me out the most was the fact that we were far away from civilization, and you never understand how quiet your surroundings can be until you've spent some time in a remote area like this, which led me to often just standing in the dark at night, listening to the surroundings of the cabin. But after the few first days, I got less paranoid. After all, I was with friends, was constantly high, and we were quite armed and dangerous. Probably most dangerous to ourselves, though, to be honest. Day 4 came. We spent the day attempting to hunt in the woods, mostly just chilling under trees with a beer and a rifle in hand. But in the evening, it started to rain heavily. After an hour, we were starting to see lightning in the distance, with quite a lot of time passing between lightning and thunder, which meant the thunderstorm itself was still some time away. So we aborted our incompetent hunting attempts and started trekking back to the cabin. It took us about an hour to reach it, due to it already being very dark and the rain creating unsafe footing. For context, you should know that once you spend a few days in the wilderness and haven't seen a soul other than your friends for days, you can become quite careless about your surroundings. I think you can imagine why I'm telling you that last part. So we enter the cabin. At that time, the thunderstorm was raging full on. We put away our gear and changed clothes, except for our guns. Yeah, I know. Drugs and guns are a horrible combination, and I wouldn't mix that stuff nowadays. But we were drilled quite well by Canadian friend's dad regarding trigger discipline, safety, etc. And man, I really miss spooning my rifle while sleeping. We cozied down in the living room at a table, started a YouTube video, and began playing cards. Barely 20 minutes passed since we returned, and at the time, we didn't bother closing the curtains in the living room, because thunderstorms are super cool. So imagine that we were 3 guys sitting around a table, occasionally in awe at the weather outside while playing cards. In such a remote place, it's extremely dark outside. Without a full moon and clear skies, it's pitch black. The only lamps we have are old, vintage looking and dimmer than my phone's screen. What comes next is how my also non-local friend has described what he saw. While sipping from his beer, another lightning went off. He spit it out instantly after the lightning came, and screamed loudly and stood up. No words, just the sound of panic. My Canadian friend and I were instantly perplexed and looked at him. There's somebody outside. He started rambling about how, in that split second, the lightning illuminated the outside of the cabin. He saw a person standing a bit of distance away from the cabin looking directly at us. Now, this is what I meant when I said cliche horror story, and barely anybody believes me at first. But trust me, this did happen. My non-local friend is obviously on full panic. His face looks anxious, This communicated to our Canadian buddy and me that this guy wasn't just messing with us. He did see somebody outside. I grabbed my rifle and pulled the bolt to rack another round into the chamber. I feel that warm sensation running down my spine of my body releasing adrenaline. I tried to stay far away from the window, stare into the darkness outside, but I can't see anything. While our Canadian friend rushed into his room to grab his pistol, I start panicking even more because I realize we didn't lock the door. Why would we? We haven't seen anyone in days and are in the middle of the wilderness. So I run to the door and lock it. Our friend returns with his pistol, which he grabbed because there was a flashlight attached to it. He carefully approached the window, then changed his pace from sneaky to fast and pushed the window open with one hand, while the other hand was aiming the handgun outside. I wish I was any good at drawing, because what we saw next when our friend turned on the flashlight was the most terrifying image I have ever seen. It is burned into my mind. The fact that I cannot share that image with other people has been bugging me for 3 years now. The light turns on. What we saw in that moment was a man, tall and slim, dressed in all black, with a hooded raincoat which he has pulled over his head, almost covering his eyes. But not far away from the cabin, just a few steps away from the window, not standing as our friend yelled earlier, but crouching, looking directly at us with clenched eyes and a terrifying little smirk on one side of his mouth. Another lightning flashes, and for that moment we were all frozen. The image of what we saw must have shocked the other guys as much as it did me, because nobody said anything for a few seconds. There is a hard-to-explain dreadful feeling about seeing something like this. In a storm, in the middle of nowhere, a person dressed in a black raincoat is suddenly crouching so close to you and facing you. Our Canadian buddy was aiming his pistol plus attached flashlight at the also frozen crouched smirking man and just yelled out, with a slight stutter and a higher-pitched voice than I've ever heard from him, "Get away from us or we will shoot." I guess that's the moment after his eyes adjusted. The raincoat man realized that this was not just a flashlight but a gun, and I was standing next to my friend with a hunting rifle in my arm. Raincoat man's slight smirk changed to something where I'm unsure if it was shock or rage. All this was happening in less than a minute. While my friend kept yelling, I was just frozen. The raincoat figure turned by about 90 degrees towards the nearest tree line and went from crouched to full sprint quickly. He ran away to the right side of our window. Two of us poked their head out of the window to see exactly where he was going. But with the heavy rainfall and darkness, we could only barely make out anything in the distance of that tree line. After a few minutes of just looking at each other in disbelief, we decided to pop off a few rounds outside the window to prove that we were for real. When the shock wore off, we decided to call the police. They asked me a lot of questions on the phone to describe the location of the cabin and a description of the man who just almost crept up on us, totally unsuspecting and only revealed due to lightning and luck. Due to us being in such a remote area, the cops told us it'd at least take 1 or 2 hours for someone to come out. They asked, because of the weather and the time, if it'd be alright if they send someone out tomorrow to talk to us about the details. Given how the man saw that we were armed, he probably wouldn't come back again. We agreed. We discussed just jumping in the truck and leaving right now, but us idiots were too lazy to refuel the truck. The idea of doing this now in the dark and in the heavy rain was just too frightening. I kept thinking about this guy lurking in the darkness and picking us off one by one. We spent the night sleeping in shifts. One person was awake and standing guard, the others at least attempting to sleep. When my turn came, the rain had died down. I turned off all the lights, opened a window, and just sat there in the darkness, trying to listen for any sound that I could hear, and looking out the windows to scan the area. Let me tell you, when you're standing in the darkness for hours in full alert mode, just trying to sit still, listen, and look around you, you have a lot of time to think and reiterate what just happened. Close to the middle of the next day, 2 cops arrived. We had to give them a detailed report of what happened, when it happened, and had to show them in which direction the raincoat shade ran off to. They said they'll organize for a patrol to comb through the woods, but that might take a while because they need experienced outdoorsmen, etc. Sadly, we didn't see any of the details of this man's face. We couldn't tell if he was young or old, only that he was tall and clean-shaven. The chances of finding who exactly that was, and finding out what the hell he was attempting to do, were very small. Though one of the officers expressed that this whole happening was deeply worrying. We left the cabin a few hours after the police left, and Canadian guy's dad insisted we stay at his place at least for a day until we feel safe again. He also wanted to hear every last detail, and figured that the time has come to install cameras around the cabin. I don't remember this part for sure, but I believe that I heard later the dad and his brother went back to the cabin and just sat there in the dark, waiting for the raincoat man to return. But I never heard any of the results, so I guess he must have gone hunting in other areas. I never heard from the cops again. Next January, I left Canada and returned home. My Canadian friend was called in for an interview a few months later, and it seemed like the police were still seriously investigating this, looking for the guy who crept up on the cabin during a thunderstorm. The image of that crouched raincoat figure completely wet and surrounded by darkness, so close to our cabin, is burned in my mind. I will most likely never forget this. I still sometimes turn off all the lights and just look out the windows in silence, trying to listen for sounds, even though I am on the other side of the world now. We've speculated a lot about what it was. The winning theory is that this guy most certainly had sinister intentions. This did not look like just an attempt at burglary. Remember, we had dim lights on. You could see that there was somebody inside the cabin. This guy was creeping towards us in a raincoat during a thunderstorm. When my friend yelled out that he saw somebody, this guy went from walking/standing to crouching, and he went closer towards the window. I suspect the raincoat man wanted to check what kind of victim was on the menu, and I don't really want to imagine what he had in store if there were two unarmed girls there, in a cabin, in the middle of nowhere. We didn't see any headlights passing the clearing the cabin was on. The guy also had no backpack or anything, just the raincoat and black weather, appropriate clothing. I'd bet my soul that this guy was a man on a mission, who knew exactly what he was doing and what he was well prepared for. While writing this post, I also started thinking about the logistics of it all. The guy must have a camp, or at least a car hidden somewhere in those woods. You can't sustain yourself out there otherwise. I also got the feeling that he either came upon the cabin during the storm itself, or that he spotted us in the woods during the hunting we did before. We moved slowly, while also not being shy with waving our lights around, and in total pitch darkness wilderness, a proper flashlight must have been as easy to spot as the beacons of Gondor, so he might have tracked us through the woods until we reached the cabin. If anybody has heard about similar things happening in the area of British Columbia near Vancouver, please let me know. That mystery has a grip on me for the rest of my life. Sometimes, I still dream of this raincoat figure creeping closer towards me with each flash of lightning. Thank you for reading. This happened to my roommate and I 2 years ago, when we drove into the national forest just outside of the town we live in. We go to a small college in New England, about 3 hours from any major city. For context, this forest has quite a few urban legends surrounding it, and the local community, although they do go there often, have a lot of superstitions about how to be safe while there. I had just broken up with my partner, and my roommate could sense I was feeling down. Finals were just around the corner, so she decided to help me get my mind off of things, and suggested we go to a nice spot she had found last week, and just chill and de-stress. We took a couple of beers with us and drove to this secluded spot in the forest. From the moment we left the main asphalt road in the forest, I saw a couple of things that unsettled me. You could see the abandoned houses of a ghost town from the higher ground the road was on, and we saw this old doll hanging from a rope in the tree. Creepy stuff, but we didn't really give it a second thought and kept driving. We got to a clearing and parked our cars behind some trees, popped open the back of our SUV and started just talking and playing music. About 10 minutes into this, 2 cars appeared from the road and parked in the clearing. My friend didn't pay them attention. Instead, she kept talking. But as I was facing them from where I sat, I couldn't stop seeing what they did. A guy popped out of each car, talked for a few minutes, and then I saw them take out a long object covered in a dark plastic bag from the back of one of the cars. This is when I noticed these guys had guns. And not like shotguns, which I see often in this town, but handguns. Then they started lighting the bag on fire. I told my friend to get down, and she turned around and saw them for the first time. Black smoke was rising from the bag, and between trying to keep my head down and steal glances at them, I saw them take out a second object and heard them shoot at it, right before they set it on fire. I don't know how long my friend and I were lying there in silence, but it was definitely enough time to let the terror sink in and whisper to each other how much we loved each other in case this was what we thought it was. At some point I looked up and saw that they were pointing at our car and saw them walking into the woods, maybe trying to follow our tracks or trying to look for us. All I know is that right then I told my friend to jump in the driver's seat and make a run for it. I shut the back door, and between that and the car starting up, the guys heard it and started running towards us, then ran towards one of their cars and hopped in. We went over a hill and were driving way above what was safe for dirt roads on a hillside. Then we lost them. We drove to a neighboring town and roamed around for a while just to make sure that no one was following us before we went back to our dorm. That day, we tried to make fun of the whole situation and got really drunk before finally breaking down and crying from knowing we had seen something we were not supposed to. We were at first terrified of not telling anyone, but eventually did tell officers on campus who contacted the police, but never found anything. In May 2009, I had just broken up with my girlfriend of almost 3 years. We had moved from Calgary to Toronto, and were still stuck living together after the breakup, as we didn't know many people in the city yet. Needless to say, the situation was pretty stressful and upsetting. So when a buddy I was going to school with at the time suggested a weekend camping/fishing trip, I jumped at the chance. He grew up in an area about an hour outside of Toronto called Flamborough. It's really beautiful. Loads of lush forests, farmers' fields, and small rivers and creeks. We decided to camp and fish along a creek called Grindstone Creek. It's close to some wetlands, and the fishing is supposed to be great. We ended up setting up our camp in what was probably a farmer's field. I'm guessing it was trespassing on our part. Bordered by a gorgeous forest. We spent the evening fishing, shooting the crap, drinking some quality craft beers, etc. As it got darker, we made a little fire and roasted potatoes and hot dogs. All in all, it was a really good night. We turned in just after midnight. We shared a tent. My buddy fell asleep before me, and I stayed up playing on my phone until probably around 1:30. I must have drifted off because the next thing I remember was being woken up by a high-pitched yipping type noise. I was kind of groggy, and it took me a moment to fully wake up. The yipping was incessant, and it sounded like a weird coyote. I laid there for a moment, listening, and then started playing on my phone again. The noise was annoying as hell. I tried ignoring it, but it sounded like it was getting closer. Finally, it sounded like it had to be no more than 10 feet from the tent.
At this point, I was getting a little unsettled. I had seen coyotes in Calgary before, and I thought of them as pretty harmless. They never looked much bigger than a smallish dog. But what if this one was rabid or something? What if it could smell our food? I have a pretty bad anxiety disorder, so I'm prone to worrying about these types of things. I nudged my buddy to see if he was awake, and he was. The noise woke him up too. We discussed what to do about the coyote, as we hadn't brought anything to scare off critters. Not a BB gun, nothing. Finally, he decided he would shine the flashlight on it and holler a lot, hoping to scare him off. He unzipped the tent, and I watched him pointing the flashlight out into the darkness. I'll never forget what happened next. His legs suddenly went all wobbly, and he sort of stumbled backwards into the tent. He had a really dumbfounded look on his face when he looked at me and babbled, "It's not a coyote. It's a dude. It's some weird dude." Normally, I would have thought he was messing with me. I'm a huge wimp and scare easily. I won't even watch horror movies. But I've never seen someone look that scared, and I never want to see that expression on someone's face again. So I knew he wasn't pulling my leg. The weird yipping and howling type noises were still going on, and in retrospect, it really didn't sound like a coyote. But I guess our groggy states, it was a way for our brains to make sense of it. Anyway, he kept telling me just to look out the tent flap to make sure he's not crazy. At this point, I was having a full-blown anxiety attack. My heart was racing. I felt like shit, but I had to look. So I slowly peeked out of the flap and waited for my eyes to adjust. And that's when I saw him. He was standing only a few arms lengths away from the tent. He was swaying a little and wearing a baseball cap. What made it awful, though, was really creepy, was that he was wearing women's lingerie. That's when I knew that there was most likely something very wrong with this guy, if the making high-pitched noises at strangers in a tent in the middle of the night didn't give it away. After I pulled my head back inside the tent, my buddy and I discussed what to do. Finally, we decided to yell at the guy to F off. My buddy started yelling, "Excuse me, can you F off? We're trying to sleep in here." The noise stopped. It was dead silent, and that's when we heard footsteps running towards the tent. They stopped right outside the tent, but we didn't waste any time. We started yelling again. "Seriously, F off. We have cell phones in here. If you don't F off, we're going to call the cops." With that, we heard him walk by the tent and head off. Sounded like he was moving towards the road. Needless to say, we lie awake, petrified until the first sign of sunlight. Then we hightailed it the hell out of there. We discussed our experience on the way home, and we're both pretty embarrassed about how scared we got. It definitely was not manly on either of our parts. I think because we're both ashamed of how we let some weirdo freak us out so much, we haven't really ever talked about it since that day. So there's you go. There's my weird story. I'll always wonder what the hell that guy was doing out there, or what was wrong with him. Sometimes I wonder if things would have turned out differently if we were a couple of girls. I'm not saying it was some serial killer, but it seemed like he was testing who was in the tent. I guess I'll never know. And for that, I'm kind of glad.
Back around 2004 or 2005, I was leaving a buddy's house headed home. He lived on Lake Ariel in Wayne County, Pennsylvania. I was a good 15 miles away, so I decided to take back roads to save time and avoid cops. As I crest this mountain road, I see a van off the side. Doors open, lights on. It's well after midnight and no one is on the road. I slowed my car, a 1989 Volkswagen ragtop, down to first gear, looking for a person or persons that may be hurt. Not a soul is around and the woods are quiet. The van off the road is not running, but all lights are on, and the driver's door is open. I remember thinking, dang, I don't have a self-service until the top of the mountain. I gotta call the cops. So I proceeded to go towards where I knew had cell service, maybe going 30 miles per hour tops. I knew this situation was messed up, but then it got worse. No more than 3 or so miles away, the brush thinned on the roadside, so you had a better view of what's in the woods. I see movement, so I let off the gas, thinking I don't want to hit a deer. As I let off, this man, soaking in fresh blood, comes from the tree line and into the road. He's so covered in gore, I couldn't tell that it was a man at first. He stumbled out in front of the car and waved me down. I was in my ragtop, top down of course. He was yelling and grabbing at my door. I dropped into first and took off. Another mile or so, I had service and called the cops. Dude was obviously hurt, and his grab for my door scared me. There was a wide space on the mountain where I agreed to wait for the cops. They were there in under 10 minutes. While I waited, I put the top up, then locked the doors. An officer took my statement and he looked over my car with a torch. The guy from the woods left a bloody smear down my door. Another officer found the van but couldn't locate the guy who came out of the woods. The cops let me go home and said they'd call if they needed anything further. Within a few days, I did get a call saying the van was located, and they asked if I could describe the van. They never found him that night, and as far as I know, they never did. Apparently, the van was stolen, and the cops surmised this guy banged himself up and took off in a panic. As far as I know, they never did track him down. To this day, I keep a lookout for a bloody man running out of the woods. This experience is 100% true and has stuck with me. I'm a wilderness survival instructor and security contractor. A couple days ago, a student of mine and good friend who I had taken out into the woods before told me his dad just got 150 acres of land in a secluded mountainous part of my state. It had a large amount of forest on it that hadn't been explored yet, as his dad was only building something for his horses that took up about 100 yards of the property, and his horses were free to roam at the moment. He said his dad got an insane deal on the property. My friend is now a dad of 3, and I know he doesn't go out into the woods that often. So I agreed to go out with him, because it seemed really fun, and I can imagine he needs a getaway every now and then. We're both indigenous, into cars, into wilderness survival, and all sorts of stuff, so we never run out of anything to talk about in the woods. His dad, however, told us that he didn't want anybody exploring the woods unless we had a gun. He said it was because he saw coyotes. Now, we're all indigenous here. We were raised in the same state. Coyotes don't actually attack people, really. My friend, who we'll call RC, also told me a while back when he was first at the property he saw movement in the tree lines that was roughly human-sized in shape, but couldn't really tell since his eyesight isn't that good. I brought my AR and a small flint knapping kit just for the fun of it, and we set off onto the property. We explored a lot of the rolling fields, creeks, multiple natural springs and ponds. Everything felt normal. It was a beautiful landscape. Eventually, we decided to get to the forested part of the property, as it hadn't been explored yet. As soon as we entered the tree line, the entire mood shifted. The forest had an ambiance of its own, very similar to the woods in the movie The Ritual. The woods were gray and dead silent save for the occasional creaking of tall, tired cedar trees. There was a very small stream running through the center of it, with sand that was black. It felt like we were surrounded, watched from all sides. It didn't take long before a very putrid stench hit our nostrils. It was the odor of rotting flesh. We decided to follow the smell and found the remains of 3 to 4 cows. I have the video. We examined the exposed skulls and couldn't find any bullet holes. It didn't appear to me that these cows had been put down. Something killed them, though. and their bones were spread over about 30 yards. There were large indentions in the dirt all around them that were very vague in their shape. We decided to press on into the woods. Now we were accompanied only by silence, the putrid odor of death, and the sound of our own heartbeats. We kept stopping at the stream, as I noticed several different types of tracks, large coyote tracks and something else that was large but intentionally avoided the sand, it seemed. We pressed on into the woods until we started to find trees that had been bent over and pinned behind other trees while they were still alive. Something that could never, ever happen naturally. I have video of that too. We hiked on and found what I can only describe as a tool made of bone lying on the ground. It was extremely crude, but looked like some kind of scooping tool or knife. It was extensively photographed. It was disturbing, because although it looked primitive, it looked way more primitive than a person would make, but an intentionally shaped tool nonetheless. We hiked on until we found a clearing with a pond that had more large oval tracks surrounding it. On the other side of the pond, we found a very strange little tree structure. It was an A-frame. It had rocks placed up against it. However, it wasn't that sturdy, and the rocks were very peculiarly placed. We found no signs of any campfires around it. We found no camping trash. This isn't exactly a place you could hike to from a house. I photographed and made a video of that little hut thing. It was getting dark, so we decided we should head back. I had a flashlight on my AR, but I didn't want to rely on that in the dark with something that kills cows and makes tools out of their bones somewhere behind us. We made our way out of the forest and back to where the trucks were parked just in time before it got too dark to see. As we were leaving, we saw something on top of one of the hills that we couldn't identify, but didn't stick around to find out what it was. It's well worth mentioning the previous owner began construction of something on the property, abruptly halted construction, and left. Again, I have extensive photos of these things, so feel free to message me, and I will post updates as possible. I had previously posted this story with my wife's account a couple of days ago on r/Bigfoot. I didn't know what we had seen, and it wasn't until someone replied with, "Feel free to post on r/Backwoods Creepy." This caught me off guard, as I had never heard of Glimmerman/Wendigo/crawlers before. Now, I haven't read too much into this topic as I have a lot going on, but I soon realized that this ties in just about everything that has happened since we moved in a year ago. I'm going to start with the seemingly unrelated incidents that have led up to this most recent, eye-opening experience. About a year ago, I moved my family and I to a home way out in the woods in Tennessee. I wanted to be brief here, but I needed to get this off my chest. And after looking into this matter a little more, I have a lot more details that I think will paint a clear picture in the end, so please bear with me. The nights here can be extremely loud. Between the crickets, the tree frogs, and the cicadas, it can almost be deafening. One night, not too long after we moved in, I had forgotten something in my car and headed outside to get it. The first thing that struck me as odd was that my dog wouldn't go outside with me. My dog goes everywhere with me, as I am her whole world. But not this night. As I held the door open, she looked out, then looked up at me like nope. So I walked out and shut the door behind me. The second thing that caught me off guard was that there was not a peep. It was dead silent. Still, I shrugged this off and walked down my front steps and headed down to my car. When I had gotten about 10 feet from my car, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I felt as though something was watching me. I looked around but saw nothing. After I reached in my car for what I had forgotten to grab earlier, I had this feeling like something was moving towards me. I took a step back and checked around me. All of a sudden, I heard one of my hedges next to me that lined the walkway to our front door rattle. At first, I thought it was a rabbit that I had spooked, as I had seen one just earlier in the day right where this was. A few seconds later, I heard the sound of a large rock, about the size of a cantaloupe, landing just a few feet away from me. It hit the walkway and bounced into a shrub. I drew my gun and called out and said whoever this was is about to be shot. After a few seconds of nothing, I began to think that maybe this was some local teenagers messing with the new people. I holstered my sidearm, turned, and started walking back to my front door. Almost as soon as I turned towards my house, I heard this deep panting sound. It sounded like a huge dog. But what made me note back to my front door was that it sounded like it was right behind me. I leaped up my front porch, turned, and drew my gun, again expecting something right there. But again, there was nothing. A couple of weeks later, I was on my porch at night, sitting on a bench with my wife. She got up and walked inside to get something, and as soon as she shut the door, I heard that panting sound again. I couldn't see anything, yet this sounded like it was right on top of me. The sound was coming from everywhere, and it was very loud. Again, I couldn't see anything, so I noped it back inside my house. Now at this point, I was questioning moving here, but after nothing else really happening, I let it go. A month or so later, it was really rainy and stormy. This is around 9 p.m., and my wife and I enjoy listening to the rain and talking about how relaxing the rain is. Me, growing up in Oregon, loved the rain, and for the past 10 years we lived in Vegas, where it would dump the entire year of rain in a day, then be bone dry for the rest of the year. For my wife, who grew up in Nevada, rain was such a rare thing. She loved going outside and watching it. So for us, this is an enjoyable experience. Except this night in particular, things took a weird turn. As we were sitting there talking about the rain and relaxing, my wife stops and said, "Did you hear that?" I said, "No, what did you hear?" She said, "I swear, it sounded like a small child calling for help out in the woods beside our house." I said, "No, I didn't hear anything." After a few moments of us listening intently, she said, "There it is again." I said, "I didn't hear anything, sweetie. Are you sure you're not just hearing things?" She looked at me offended that I didn't hear anything and said, "No, I'm positive. How could you not hear that? It was our son. I think he's out there and lost." I said, "No, he's in the house sleeping on the couch." Then we both looked through the blinds that were open right behind us, and we could see all of our children laying there. She said, "That's so weird. I swear it sounded like our son." I said, "Well, it isn't him. He's right there. Besides, I don't hear anything." She then stands up and says, "Wow, he's really crying out for help. I need to go look for him." Now at this point, if you knew my wife, you'd know that she is absolutely creeped out by the woods and wouldn't be caught dead walking into them during daylight, much less at night during a storm. I grabbed her hand and said, "I have been listening intently, and there is absolutely nothing calling out for help. You need to stay here." At this point, I'm getting worried about her. She was acting completely out of character. Not to mention that at this time, she is 8 months pregnant with our baby daughter. She then says, "What if there is some child out there lost in the woods?" I said, "Well, first off, I would be able to hear them too. Secondly, there are no kids around here for miles, and the odds of them being lost 100 feet from our house that's lit up like a Christmas tree is nil." She then says, "I know, but what if it's a kid?" Before I could say anything else, she stands up and starts walking towards the stairs. I jumped up and grabbed her hand again and said, "No, you're not. Get in the house. I don't know what's going on, but you need to go inside." She then complies and we both go inside. I didn't know what this was, but it freaked me out. A few months after this, just as it was getting dark outside, I heard the front door to our house open and I got up to investigate. We have autistic 6-year-old twins, and we have the door set up so they can't open it without us there. So to hear this sound, it could only be my wife. What was weird was the fact that she usually doesn't go outside without saying something to me. I walked out front and saw my wife walking down our private road towards the drive on the side of our house. I asked her what she's doing, and she says she was sitting on the back patio and kept hearing a baby crying out in the woods. I said, seriously? And you just decided to walk off into the woods to investigate? She then looks out into the woods and says, see, there it is again. Again, I can't hear anything, but what I did notice is that it was completely silent out again. I told her just like before, the chances of a baby being out in the woods outside our house is slim, and that she needed to get back in the house. She said, what if someone left their baby out there? I said, well, if that were true, I would hear it too. Now at this point, I was really starting to worry about my wife's mental health. I actually asked her to see a psychiatrist and she did. Now, looking back, I feel really bad about this, knowing what I know. The key to this moment was that my wife had just given birth to a baby girl a month before. A few days after this, we're out on the front porch. It's early evening, and I had just mowed the lawn that day, and our 3-year-old son was riding around on his little car in front of the house. Now, he knows that he's not allowed to go outside of a certain area that we've mapped off. He loves playing outside, but with the road behind 50 feet from our front porch, we have to be careful, as a lot of boaters will fly through after drinking all day on their boats. As we're talking, we are both keeping an eye on him. A neighbor drives by and stops to say hi for a second. This interaction took approximately 8 seconds, as all they said was, how are things? We said good, and he told us he would stop by later as his wife got something for the kids, who happens to be one of their teachers in school. And we said, okay, great, and he drove off. I looked over where our son was and he was gone. I called out his name and ran over to the side of the house and could hear his car on our side drive. I scolded him for leaving the area, and he said something in his 3-year-old gibberish and pointed to the woods behind our house. I said he had 5 seconds to get back up to that porch, or else, and he adamantly pointed back at the direction of the woods and kept trying to tell me something. I looked off in the direction of the woods and just assumed he saw a deer or squirrel or something and wanted to see it up close. I walked him back up to the front of the porch, and he cried the whole way there. He got really upset that I wouldn't let him go into the woods, but I just wrote this off as him being curious, as most 3-year-old boys are. Now, this incident isn't isolated, as our twins have done similar things, but nothing quite as extreme as this. There have been nights where we had just laid down for the night and heard a loud bang on the side of our house on the wall behind our bed. It was so loud that I jumped up and looked out the window. Our floodlight had come on, but I couldn't see anything. Now, the weird part about this is that our bedroom sits about 12 feet from the ground level, as we have a full-size basement that's a cinder block. I put on my slippers and grabbed one of the 12-gauge shotguns and walked outside to investigate. It was dead silent again. The floodlight that's on the side of the house had clicked off at this point, so I walked over to the end of the deck and shined my light around the yard. There was nothing. I walked around the house and shined the light around intently. As I approached the back side of my house, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It felt like someone was watching me. I shined my light up in the trees again, but nothing. I rounded the corner, and the first thing I noticed was that my 3 dogs that were in their area wouldn't make a peep. Now, our dogs have no filter and will bark at anyone and everyone. This includes me. So to see them hiding with their tails between their legs, not making a peep, really had me worried. As I kept walking, all of a sudden the crickets and frogs started making sounds again. It was as if someone had clicked a switch. I walked back into the house and told my wife that I hadn't seen anything. She shrugged and said, okay, as long as our dogs were okay. Due to the circumstances that night, I decided to let the dogs in and sleep with us. This very same thing has happened on all 4 exterior walls of our house. It's random and annoying, but just like this instance, every time there is nothing going on outside. There have also been times where we were sitting in the house, and as I was watching a movie, my wife walked over to me and said, "Did you call me?" I said no, and she said that she swears she heard me call her name in her ear. She said that it was definitely my voice, but she didn't understand because it sounded so close, and I was a good 20 feet away from her in my recliner. The important part to this was that she was sitting at the table doing something, and the slider to the backyard was open behind her. Now our back patio sits about 20 feet off the ground, and is like a balcony, as it has no stair access outside. I think the previous owner built it for barbecuing. There have been several instances where she would say she heard someone whisper in her ear, but she couldn't make out the sound. Again, I kept thinking she was going crazy. But as you'll see, I think all of this is tied into this final moment where things are revealed. The last thing I want to mention before we get into what just happened is that I have a shooting range built behind my workshop on the opposite side of our property next to the main road. It's kind of on a downslope, but it works perfectly for what I need it for. The range itself is cut straight into the woods, going down about 100 yards or so. When you're at the downrange, you have woods surrounding you on all sides, except back up to my shop. I have to say, it's always felt creepy when I'm dealing with my targets or mowing. When you're down there, it feels like you're miles from anyone. One day, around 5 in the evening, I was sighting in a new rifle scope. The sun was still up, but was going to start to fade soon, so I knew I was going to be doing my final test. Up until this point, nothing really happened while I was making my multiple trips down range, other than this feeling of uneasiness. As soon as I got down range, I kept getting this feeling like someone or something was watching me. I looked around but didn't see anything. As I was placing stickers over my previous shots, I heard something big off to the side of me. It sounded like a large branch had snapped off a tree. Now, if you've been in Tennessee woods, you'll know a lot of branches fall off of trees randomly out of nowhere, so this is nothing new. Except this time, it was very loud, and sounded like fresh, strong wood, if that makes any sense. I turned and looked, but again couldn't see anything. I started walking back up to my rifle, and I swear I heard someone right behind me. I turned around, but again saw nothing. As I started to walk again, I heard this deep growl. It was really deep and loud, and what's worse is that it was all around me. I turned around facing the range and started walking backwards. The thought of some rabid dog charging out of the bushes had me freaked out, so running wasn't a good idea. I slowly walked backwards up the hill to my rifle, but nothing happened. I grabbed my rifle and sprayed the target with rapid fire, hoping to scare off whatever was stalking me. I left 10 rounds in the mag and grabbed my rifle bag and quickly walked back up to the house. I never told my wife about this as I didn't want to freak her out. Fast forward about a year later, from when we moved in, and my niece is staying with us as a live-in nanny to earn money over summer break from college. We were on our way back from the store, and about a mile from our house, I saw two big eyes reflecting in the headlights coming from a wide tree on the side of the road just ahead. It had caught my attention because they were higher than a deer, but a different color and size. Just as I had said, "What is that?" and squinted, they vanished. I had made a comment that it was almost as if I had known I could see its eyes move. The color was kind of a golden green, but they resembled the mannerism of a large cat as they felt ominous. It's hard to explain, but I shrugged it off as we're passing the tree and saw nothing. A few moments later, we arrived at the house. As we were getting bags out of the car, my 3-year-old son came bolting out of the house excited to see me. As I was waiting to help carry in her bags, I heard my dog growl. I looked in the direction she was looking at my neighbor's property across the street. Now, what I saw has kept me up all night. Up until this point, I have always been skeptical, as I had never seen anything with my own 2 eyes. Even with what had happened to me a year prior, I still have my doubts that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Now, my street is kind of a spread out neighborhood. Each house sits on several acres. and at the end of our road is Kentucky Lake. My neighbor's house sits adjacent to my house on about an acre lot. Directly in front of my house is a wall of woods, and directly behind my house is several thousand acres of untouched forest. As I was looking across the street to my neighbor's property, I saw a large dark figure between the trees at first. The movement caught me off guard, as it looked like something big moving quickly on all fours. Then it came into clear view. It stood up and walked like a man. At first, I didn't know what to make of it. It was very tall, but what was strange about it was the distance it was covering, and the fact that when it was in front of its shed, I swear I could see through it. It was clearly walking, but moving faster than any person could at a sprint. More importantly, there was no sound. It was like it was phasing in and out of reality as it moved. I said, "What the hell is that?" and realized that it was looking directly at us. It had moved at an angle away from us to minimize its time out in the open, and moving quickly as it could, while still being silent. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I realized that whatever it was stalking us. I told my niece to get in the house now, and I grabbed my son and booked it inside. I grabbed my AR-15 with a short scope and came back outside to see my niece still grabbing stuff out of the car. Knowing I told her firmly and clearly to get in the house, her disregard to my command annoyed me. But still, I watched over her without saying a word. As she was slowly walking, she turned towards the woods across the street from my house and suddenly bolted for the house. She ran up the steps in a panicked state. I asked her what she saw and her face was pale as a ghost. She said, "I heard something big in the woods walking loudly on the leaves, and when I turned toward it, I heard a deep, guttural growl." I asked her why she didn't come when I told her, and she said that she thought I was talking to my son. I told her what I had seen, and she wanted to get a closer look to see if she could see something. I told her that it was not a good idea, but she went anyway. As she was walking down to the walkway, I heard the sound of dry leaves crunching in the woods across the street. I told her to stop and come take the flashlight. Now at this point, she is about 6 feet away from my wife's SUV. As she turned and started walking back to me, I caught a glimpse of something gray and hairy bolt from behind the SUV across the street into the woods. My porch is a raised porch, and our SUV is about 6.5 feet tall, and whatever this was, it cleared about 45 feet in what looked like a single jump. It moved like lightning. Whatever it was, it wanted my niece. It jumped behind the car out of my line of sight and was waiting for her. She still doubted my warnings and grabbed the flashlight and walked back towards the car. As she entered my driveway, she stopped dead in her tracks, leaned forward as if she could see something. I asked her what she saw. She turned and ran back up on the porch with a terrified look on her face, saying nope, 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 over and over again. She said it was a figure hiding inside of a tree and that she saw its eyes. I asked her what they looked like, and all she could say was that they looked dull and red at first, but as she got closer, they looked dead. I said, "What do you mean dead?" And she said that there were pupils that looked like they were gray, like the way his eyes look when they go blind. She said it was really dark gray, and she swears she could see through it, almost like a dark cloud. She wanted to go down again and took a step down the stairs, and as she did, it revealed itself from the tree. I said, "Get inside," and I went in and locked the door. It looked like a tall, human-shaped being. It was really tall and looked ominous as hell. The next morning, we did a height comparison to the tree limb she saw it stand over, and it put its height around 9 feet tall, and its eyes were about 6 inches apart. At this point, I don't know what this thing was. After doing some research, I think it was a glimmerman/crawler. I looked to see if there had been any other sightings in Benton County, but nothing. More importantly, I swear it would phase in and out, almost like a shadow person, but bigger and more obvious. Now, I originally posted this on r/Bigfoot, but after doing a bunch of research, I believe this belongs here. One of the things that makes this fit is that it can communicate telepathically. This explains why everyone was hearing something that nobody else could hear. Secondly, it has a playback-like communication, so when I heard a dog panting, it was probably one of my dogs that it had heard. My wife was actually hearing our son crying for help, as he had recently fell and cried for help. The baby crying would be our newborn baby who she had given birth to recently. And it must have heard me call my wife's name and kept telepathically calling my wife's name with my voice. Another thing that my niece had said that night was that she felt compelled to go back outside to it. She said she felt like this thing was communicating with her somehow, and it wanted her to go back outside. The more I read about this thing, the more everything that's been happening over the past year makes sense. One thing that I find extra convincing is that down the road towards the lake, there is a property that is barbed wired off, and it's a wall of forest with no driveway. A lot of property down our road is underdeveloped, owned land, and on one of the trees, there is a large old sign that says, "Screamer lives here," with an arrow pointing back into the woods. Now I have to admit, when I first saw this sign, I laughed, thinking maybe the owner screamed at trespassers who entered his property, and teenagers put up the sign to mess with him. But when I did a satellite search of our neighborhood, that entire section of road has no houses or trails or anything, and is just pure forest as far as the eyes can see. One of the things that this thing is said to do is make a loud scream when threatened. Now that you understand my story, I doubt this is the ending. The next question is, what can we do? I don't want my wife or kids to disappear one day. And if there is more than one of these things out there, this really makes the missing 411 make a whole lot of sense. I feel perplexed and scared as to what can I do. Any advice? I will try and keep this post alive with any new experiences. So I dated someone who owned a cadaver dog. Basically, they can find dead bodies. It was a new term to me when I met them. Anyways, they explained that they work with rescue teams. We live in wilderness country. The dog's job was to sniff out bodies for people who might have gotten lost and died, buried under avalanches, etc. After 5 months of dating, my now ex asked if I could house/dog sit. I was more than happy to. It was a great dog. Would be dog setting for 2 weeks while they visited family. I was warned that it has happened on hikes before that the dog picks up on the scent of a corpse, and I was given the steps to follow if it happens. First couple of days were pretty uneventful. Then one day the dog is dragging me down this trail, and I'm panicking because I was like, oh shoot, am I going to see a dead body? But the dog stops at this very stern woman, just sauntering along. She keeps looking back and forth between me and the woman. She gives me a quick, "Your dog isn't well trained," and keeps going. I had to drag him away. It happens with this same woman a few more times, so I call the owner to bring it up. I describe the woman, and my ex is so shocked and confused, not familiar with the woman. Fast forward to my last night dog sitting. I was going to bed and had this horrific nightmare of being held down in bed by the woman. I hear a bark and wake up. The dog is standing next to me on the bed, in its alert position, staring at the bed. I didn't get any sleep, and I never got an answer. I lived in Columbia, South Carolina, and frequented Congaree National Park, so I'm familiar with the area. I often would jump the fence and walk the boardwalk at night. and it's super peaceful to walk the swamp and hear all the wildlife. They never have a ranger or guard there after hours, so I was always alone. The last time I did this was in October of 2021. I was taking my usual stroll with flashlight in hand. I should mention, between the insects and frogs, the sound is loud. But then, it completely stopped when I was about a mile in. I heard what I thought was my wife call me from the trailhead, but she wasn't there. I was alone and she was out of town. I then heard water sloshing to my right and saw nothing with my flashlight. I chalked it up as being tired and kept moving. The wildlife started up shortly after and everything was fine. Maybe 15 minutes later, I noticed it got eerily quiet again and heard swamp water swashing on my left. But this time, it sounded more deliberate, like somebody walking. I was in a thick portion of the cypress and couldn't see more than 20 feet in front of me. And then I heard my wife's voice again. Again, she wasn't with me and was out of town, clearly not moving through a swamp at 1 a.m. I saw what looked like a human silhouette move between the trees for a split second, but it was off. Very skinny, pale, and taller than me at 6 feet. I noped out of there and ran the almost 2 miles back to my truck and didn't slow down until I heard the wildlife again. Like I said, this is a boardwalk that's in a swamp in the boonies. Nobody's walking around in the water at night without a light. Or ever, honestly. And I don't know of any animal that big that walks in bipedal pattern. And I've spent my life outdoors. I feel like I should add that I wasn't high or sleep deprived. I just like the woods at night. I was so freaked out by this that I came to Reddit and dove into some of the stories on this sub as well as others. I'm convinced I encountered a crawler or wendigo or something else that can mimic voices. There is no way some meth head was stumbling through the swamp, miles from civilization, that sounded exactly like my wife. But then again, it's also South Carolina. A few years ago, in the northern parts of Sweden, I'm going out for a nice evening of fishing. I am what I guess is called a fishing supervisor. I check that the other fishermen got their license at a certain area of lakes and streams. This is in late summer, and I've been doing my round, which I usually end with going to a small lake and fly fish for some trout. This lake or pond is pretty deep in the forest, and I rarely meet anyone there. Actually, I've never met anyone there. This lake looks kind of like a crater. A perfect round circle that's perhaps 100 meters in diameter. It contains a natural population of perch and trout. It's a warm summer evening with a slight breeze. The birds are chirping and the fish are rising to all the insects spawning on the surface. I rig my gear and aim for one of the fish rising to the right of me. The same second as my fly lands on the surface, it's like someone pauses time. The sun hides behind a cloud. The wind stops blowing. The birds are suddenly silent, and the fish stop eating. A smell rises from the ground I'm standing on. It smells like something dead, something rotten, like I have a carcass buried under my feet. All of a sudden, I am aware there is something walking out in the forest behind me. Maybe 10 to 15 meters behind me. It's like I can see it in the corner of my eye, but still, I really can't see it. Every hair on my body is on its end, and it's suddenly very cold around me. The thing watching me just stands there, and I don't have the courage to turn around at all. I see my fly sink to the bottom, but I can't move. I can't do anything about it because I don't dare move. Then the wind hits me, and it carries the awful smell away. The sun hits me again. A bird is singing somewhere in the forest, and the almost overtaking feeling of being watched lets go of me.
I turn around and there is nothing there. On the lake, the fish start rising again. I pack my gear and throw the backpack on my back and run for it. Through the forest, to my car. I hit the gas and drive like a maniac until I find the big road and civilization again. I park at the side of the road and say to myself, "What was that?" My heart is still racing. I haven't visited this lake since this happened, and I don't know anyone else who has either. What do you guys think it was? I've probably visited this place 20 times before this happened, and never felt anything like it. The only thing is that I'm always afraid of bears when visiting it. I do fish at a lot of ponds and lakes that's pretty deep in the forest. There's always a lot of wildlife in these places. Deer, moose, fox, and the occasional wolf, bobcat, and bear. I'm never afraid of meeting one, except when I've been visiting this particular lake. Sorry for bad English. As you probably understand in the beginning, I'm from Sweden. After reading a few posts on here, I've decided to add one of the creepier, still unexplained events that happened to me and a group of friends within the past 5 years. Thinking back on it, I still get this unnerved bad feeling that just sort of lingers. Anyways, here it goes. A group of friends and myself rented a place on a lake for just a fun-filled, drunken weekend. We were all in our young to mid-20s, and it was supposed to be a big party. For the most part, that's what it was. The Friday night and Saturday morning, we pretty much went out having a blast on the water and just doing fun, stupid stuff. Well, naturally, when Saturday afternoon rolled around, we were all so dead from going out that we all decided it would be a night of no drinking. Maybe a little weed smoking by some of us, but nothing more than that. And just kind of having a chill evening and night. That's what it was. Relaxed. So 9 p.m. comes rolling around and about 8 of us were inside the house and 5 outside. The house was a 2-story with a 2nd-story deck / back porch, and it was surrounded by the woods, and then down through the woods you would then hit the lake. I'll mention that we had already experienced some weird vibes from the locals when we first arrived in town. Mostly just backcountry old-timers that I assumed were leering and irritated because we were a bunch of college-age kids looking to have a good time. But the town and the lake were large, so it's not like anyone knew where we were staying. Anyways, 3 of my friends were on the upstairs back porch, and my other friend and I were downstairs outside, just talking on this old table near the woods. I mean, it was otherwise just a really nice night. My friend and I were getting lost in conversation, and all of a sudden there was this weird feeling that encompassed us, like an unnerving physical presence that came from the woods behind us. It was so strong we both kind of quieted down, and then out of nowhere this loud chanting abruptly came from the woods. I have no idea how far away it was. Because of the way the lake is set up, I'm pretty sure the voices carried up through the forest. It sounded like a cult chanting away, and all of the voices were male. I mean, they were loud and perfectly in sync. I think we were silent for all of about 20 seconds before I couldn't contain myself and darted towards the house with her following me. I don't know how to explain the feeling that came with the chanting, but it was almost evil, like something so powerfully uninviting. I was shaking by the time that I got up to the 2nd story and ran out the balcony with the other 3 friends. One of them my brother. By the time we got up there, the chanting was gone, and I naturally asked, "Did you guys hear that?" in the most shaky, freaked out voice. They all had heard it, and not seconds later the chanting began again. So the 5 of us are out there peering into the forest, listening to this chanting that would sometimes sound far away, and then would sound relatively close. All male voices in the weirdest language, or I don't even know what it was. It sounded like a strange, extreme church. Then following the chanting, a loud bang like someone hit a huge metal object. And then the worst part came. A man wailing, like an extreme pain wailing. All of my hair was up. It was the freakiest experience ever. My brother and I were staring at each other in a mixture of scared excitement and horror. The wailing stopped, and then it was back to the chanting, which eventually died out. I was so freaked out by it, I wanted to call the cops, because whoever screamed had been in a lot of pain. That, mixed with the weird chanting, just made me immediately think of some terrible sacrifice going on. One friend tried to say it had to be some drunk guys just messing around singing and being weird, but no way was that coming from some drunk guys. They were perfectly in sync. Then the bang, and then the well of pain. And then, all that weird tension and energy was just gone. No, I didn't call the cops, and I wish I would have. But honestly, the forest was so large, and since the lake house was up looking down at the woods and lake, it could have been anywhere. It definitely wasn't in our close proximity, but it was close enough to hear all of that perfectly. We went in and got some of the others, but by the time they came out, the chanting had stopped. Someone wanted to go explore and find out where it had been coming from, but obviously that was a stupid idea. After that, I was so ready to go home. I can't explain the relief of driving away from there the next morning. Even now, it gives me the worst feeling. Whatever that was, it felt so wrong and evil. I'll never forget that moment. I can only imagine that it was some weird cult stuff. So this experience that I had was really weird. I went out rock hounding solo today to a place my husband and I have gone before. Everything seemed normal when I arrived. It's a very secluded area of creek with a rock bar in the middle of the creek, and with a small patch of woods to the left, and a dense forest on the right. I crossed the creek and set up on my gear on the rock bar, grabbed a bag and started walking up the creek. About 45 minutes in, I kept looking up at the forest. I don't know why, but I just kept getting an eerie feeling. Every now and again, I'd hear a couple of thumps out there, but you know, nature, so I didn't think anything of it. About an hour in, I heard my first meow. I was so focused on pulling clay that I literally stood up and was like, I did not just hear a cat meow, did I? 10 minutes go by, and I'm walking further up creek, and damn it if I didn't hear it again. I stopped and was like, yep, I just heard a cat meow. How strange. But like, something seemed really off, and I started to feel uneasy. So I turned around and headed back to my site. Something about that meow wasn't right. It wasn't a painful meow, but just like a matter-of-fact meow, if that makes sense. About 5 minutes into the trek, I definitely hear a meow again, and I'm sweating like crazy because of the heat, but instantly feel cold, clammy, and the hair is standing up on the back of my neck. I know what I was supposed to be hearing, a single meow, but it wasn't coming from a cat. It sounded like someone or something imitating a meow. I keep focused on getting back to my site, and about 5 minutes later, another single meow. Here's where I realize things are getting really weird. The meow always sounded the same distance from me, no matter how far I kept walking. I finally reach my site and pull out my drinks and plop down to rehydrate. That's when another meow sounded, and this time, I knew with everything in me that that was not a cat following me. I calmly gathered up my gear and started to trek across the creek to the path to my car, and another meow. I made my way across the creek and hunched down into a pit. I parked my car right next to the edge of the forest and was really starting to lose my stuff. I get my keys and mace out and put my gear on me so I can drive into my car and rearrange later. And that's exactly what I did. I nearly shit myself finding the courage to make it to my car, but I did, and I hightailed it out of there fast. Thoughts? The rational answer is someone was screwing with me. But how did they get back there? It's like 200 acres of forest. Also, edit to add, I'm in northern Alabama. This occurred around 1999 or 2000. My best friend and I were avid outdoor adventurers and amateur pot growers. We would frequently find secluded places in the woods that allowed for ample light and shade for plants to grow, and that would not allow them to be easily found. One particular day, we went to an annex of trails located near a New Jersey State Park trail system. The trails weren't in the park, but I had hiked them before and knew they weren't that frequented. We had gone out that day with our seeds, partially sprouted in moist paper towels. We parked the car at the trailhead and started hiking in. We covered a mile or so and then ventured off the trail into the woods. We found a clearing, planted seeds, and tied a few barely visible ribbons off to mark the way to the plant spot to check them in the future. My friend and I got back on the trail and started walking back to the car, when my friend noticed a man in the other direction just staring at us. He was probably in his 30s or 40s, bald head, normal clothes. We didn't think anything of it for the most part, but we definitely kept looking back as anyone would when someone is behind them in the woods. We saw that he was walking 60 plus or so feet behind us. It seemed weird, but it was probably more so to us having anxiety that we planted seeds. We picked up the pace, but the man also seemed to pick up the pace as we weren't gaining any distance. At one point, we decided to just get off the trail and let him pass. We turned off the trail and walked into a thicket of stickier bushes, which I remember vividly getting shredded on. We got deep into the woods and heard cursing. When we turned around, the man was coming through where we entered. It was at that moment we actually became scared. Mind you, we're two young, strong 19-year-olds, but a man following you in the woods is pretty creepy. We made a U maneuver to outflank him, and came out of the woods a bit further down trail. Once we were back on the trail, we ran. As we were running, there was a fork in the trail and my friend went right and I left. I realized my mistake as my buddy was going down the correct path and I wasn't. So I turned around and started running back towards the fork to follow my friend. As I was running towards the direction we came from, to get to the fork, I could see the man running towards me down the trail. He was a distance away, but not far enough in my eyes. Survival mode kicked in and I ran as hard as I could. I caught up to my friend who was walking at that point. I screamed he's after us and we both booked it all the way back to the car. We got in the car shaking and out of breath. We backed up and started to get out of the parking lot when the man appeared on the trailhead. He stopped there and just stared at us as we drove away. I always wonder what that was all about. Did he want to kill a couple of 19-year-olds? Was he also doing something illegal in those woods and wanted us gone? My buddy and I still laugh and talk about that day 22 years ago. I'm posting this for my boyfriend who doesn't have Reddit. Last weekend, he went up on a 2-mile hike into a small creek to fish in North Carolina. On his way up the mountain, he kept thinking that he saw things in his peripheral vision, looking backwards to see shadowy dark crags and rocks or a shadow falling along the tree bark. The mountain air was crisp and refreshing,
at an altitude of over 2,000 feet. Yet, whenever he felt this weird presence, he described smelling something like a propane tank up his nostrils, sulfur, and damp stickiness. There was no explanation or reason to smell that in this place. He had visited many times before and never smelled this in the area. The whole way up, the unsettling feeling of being watched maintained, and he just kept chanting, "God is with me, I fear no evil. God is with me, I fear no evil." Over and over. He swore to me that he felt like something was following him all the way up, maybe too scared to get close, and that he now thought he knew what a demon smelled like. He made it to his fishing spot and returning down the mountain, again saw the unmistakable shadowy movement out of the corner of his eye blend back into the trees behind him. Has anyone ever been alone in the woods and smelt that same smell or felt any kind of presence like this? I know there's a lot of folklore around the Appalachian Mountains about haints and things of that sort. I think he wants to figure out what it means and know if he's alone in this experience. The place was called Panther Town Creek. So I live in a cul-de-sac in a suburban neighborhood with a medium-sized wooded area behind my house. My bedroom is literally next to my backsliding glass door, and every night I can hear something large moving around back there. All of my cats and dogs are inside, so I know it's not them. It'll be slowly moving around back there and then stop. I'll say something loudly and then it'll start up again. Sometimes it'll even move faster, which will make me go back inside. I don't believe it's a wolf because I've only had one encounter with one in my 12 years of living here. Usually I'll hear the wolves howling at night, but they're always far away. I've been back in those woods during the day and I've saw nothing, not even a snake. It only happens in the dead of night. There's a legendary Bigfoot-like creature known as the Flintville Monster that's been spotted since it was seen and shot by several cops in the 1970s. But that community is several miles away. I just don't know what it could be. My family and I went on a trip to the Hocking Hills area of southern Ohio a few weeks ago. There was a place that I always wanted to visit, the abandoned ghost town of Moonville Rail Tunnel. I have never been to this area, so I don't know what to expect. But I did know that it was pretty deep in the woods. We took a trip from our rented cabin using Google for GPS to the location. We start driving and it's, for lack of better words, real impoverished where we were driving. Hills Have Eyes-esque. We literally only see a few cars on the way there and are on back roads. We get to a point where we need to enter into a forest and we're close to the tunnel. There was a sign that said we were entering Bubba Wood. For a little additional information, I have a Mercedes that I am just lucky to have, and have my husband in the car, a black man with dreadlocks, my 10-year-old, non-verbal autistic son, and my 6-year-old daughter. We drive down this real creepy stone road into the forest, and there's nothing back there. No houses, no cars, nobody. We see signs that we're close and pull in the parking lot. There's a footbridge with a ton of stuff on it that people put there. We walk over the footbridge and make our way towards the tunnel, which is a lot larger than I expected. We hear this sound coming from the other side of the tunnel that goes into the woods away from the parking lot. A truck comes driving through the tunnel towards us while we are on foot. He gets out of his truck with a chainsaw, and it's a white guy in his 60s. He walks with my entire family everywhere we go, and through the tunnel, I tried to make small talk with him and pull some info about if he worked for the Department of Natural Resources, etc. He really wasn't budging. We turn around and walk out of the tunnel, and he starts using a chainsaw behind us, and the sound is just echoing through this tunnel. At this point, we have no cell phone service, and literally no one knows my family is out there except for us. I was already worried my car was sending the wrong idea to people, like we have money or something. We don't. We rush to the car to get the kids in their booster seats, and this dude comes driving over the footbridge in his truck towards us in the parking lot. I honestly don't even know how his truck fit on it. He stops again and gets out of his truck and starts walking the other direction, much to our relief. About this time, I noticed there are dusty handprints on my car. I asked my husband if they were his, and we compared his hand and my son's, and they were not a match. I don't know who could have touched the car because we were with the chainsaw man the entire time we were there. We get out of there as fast as possible. Just a few minutes later, I look in my rearview mirror and there's a bunch of dust kicked up behind us, and there he is. He had to have driven pretty fast on the stone road to catch up to us like that. There is nowhere to go in the woods. The road is basically one lane, and we have no cell service or GPS. Every time I think we lose him, he is there again. I'm waiting for my tires to get popped, or something, or for this guy to ram me off the road into a ravine in the woods. Finally, we get out of this woods, and I turn out and he's still following. We were following printed directions to get back, and I ended up making a wrong turn in the excitement. The guy in the truck was finally gone, and I turned around to go back past the stone road that goes into the forest. There is one lone house near this road, and there is his truck, parked there. He had to have seen us drive onto this road into the woods, and taken some back way to the tunnel. I don't know if he was just trying to protect the site from more graffiti or what, but he really creeped us out. It was like every scary movie trope rolled into one single event. Me and my best friend were walking to the park. It was getting dark. My boyfriend wasn't far behind and was just finishing his pint at the pub. It wasn't dark when we set off, but it was getting dark by the time we reached the entrance to the park. Our plan was to just sit down and chill. Anyway, we heard a voice. I didn't respond to it, but I asked Josh, "Are they saying my dead name?" He said it sounded like Nessa, not Vanessa, which is weird because we may have heard two different things. Josh called me Nessa right up until I came out, and he found a new nickname for me. Everyone else called me Vanessa. I was distinctly creeped out by the voice, and so was Josh. We waited for my boyfriend to arrive and sat down at the entrance to the park, but didn't go in. That was enough outdoors for me. We walked Josh home, then went home ourselves. What am I to make of this? Edit. I was posting something about the government and how awful what is happening is, and behind me was a clapping noise. Every time I looked away from behind me, it stopped. I watched behind and it continued, but I saw nothing there. It again sounded mocking, like the voice in the woods. Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end of the stories. I really, really do appreciate it. And I want to send a special thank you out to all of our channel members. Thank you so much, Claire, Casey Brown, Atlas, They Love Jay, No One, Avery Proltz, Antoinette Flowers, Snea Nair, Tyler Aliberti, Francis Egan, Natasha Hovermail, Leslie Jarbath, Caroline Hawksworth, Glenn Williams, Tamaki Amajiki, Thumb, Eric Donter, Selena Stewart, The Grim Reaper's Nightmare, Lisa Lynn, Tangela Young, Miss Cannabis, Anon Q, Mathematica, Carrie Morris, Christy Goodall, Recovery BMX UK, Cherry, Cheryl Taylor Harris, Lindsay Chavez, Flat Booty Biscuits, West Virginia Angel, Jamie Gavisk, Shay Shay, Lexi Lou, Xanax Master, Dark Poison, Michelle Dixon, Spike 2021, Patrick F., Corey Maloney, CC's Castle, Charity McVeigh, Tom H., Jess and Dave McDaniels, Melissa E. Gondata, Salvador VL, Derek Slink, Randy Music, Brooklyn Ledbetter, Skin Crawler, Lisa Thompson, Liz C., Melissa Robinson, Borden Short T., Natasha Strom, Sarah Rodriguez, Melissa Reddy, Kayla Johnston, Skittle Britches, Carlise Von Oswegen, Furberry's Fables, Taryn, Brittany, Hail Mary, Inner Scare Wifey, Ruby Wilson, Vanita Tillman, Jennifer Moyer, Classic Sonic the Hedgehog, Chili, Cappy Karma, Paul Reese, Mash K0101, and Honey Pond. Thank you all so much for being members. I appreciate it heavily, and I appreciate everyone who watches my videos. Thank you all so much. Please enjoy the extra rain at the end of this video. Good night, everybody.
In addition, YouTube's algorithm prioritizes videos with many likes and subscriptions. So, if you enjoyed this video, please click the like and subscribe buttons to help more people see and know about this content. Thank you for watching and listening.